Hello and welcome to Race for the White House, a show where we get you the latest from America's political landscape. With just 3 months to go for the election, the presidential race is heating up as the Democratic and Republican nominees leave no stones unturned to secure their victory. The Democrats are hoping that enthusiasm surrounding Kamala Harris's first week as a likely nominee will help them pull off a major victory in November. Meanwhile, the Republicans are banking on Donald Trump and are billing him as the candidate who took a bullet for America. Ever since President Joe Biden dropped out of the race, political pundits have scrambled to assess the implications of the Harris-Trump rivalry. Overall, the race remains close, but a recent IPSOS poll shows that Vice President Kamala Harris has closed the gap that opened in the final weeks of Joe Biden's re-election bid. The poll also shows that Kamala Harris is holding a 1-point lead over Donald Trump. Now, while Biden trailed by 3 points on the day he dropped out of the race, Harris and Trump are now neck and neck nationally. In fact, in 6 key battleground states, namely Michigan, Wisconsin, Nevada, Pennsylvania, Arizona, and Georgia, Harris's recent polling has shown some improvement compared to Biden. In particular, her support has increased among Black, Latino, young, and female voters. On the other hand, Trump's favorability rating is hovering at around 41%. This poll shows that registered voters prefer Trump's approach on the economy, immigration, and crime, while viewing Harris as having the better plan on healthcare. With less than 100 days to go until the election, Harris has injected notable enthusiasm into a previously demotivated Democratic Party. Her entry has also revived the enthusiasm of Democratic voters in a race where voter turnout will be paramount. The most notable thing is that this growth has come in just the first week of Harris's campaign. The renewed buzz has also triggered a prolific week of fundraising for Harris's campaign for the presidency. In fact, she's pulled in a staggering $200 million in her very first week as the potential Democratic nominee. Now, moving on to some other news. Many believe that Donald Trump's near-death encounter last month may have triggered a change in him, his political style, and his rhetoric. Many might agree that the former president's speech at the Republican National Convention was devoid of insults and filled with gratitude. There were no digs at Sleepy Joe or cackling Kamala. Very few insults, and in fact very few mentions of his election opponents at all. Unfortunately, that change in political style was short-lived. During an interview with the National Association of Black Journalists on Wednesday, the former president questioned whether his Democratic rival, Kamala Harris, is black or Indian.
Well, I can say, no, I think it's maybe a little bit different. So, I've known her a long time indirectly, not directly very much. And she was always of Indian heritage, and she was only promoting Indian heritage. I didn't know she was black until a number of years ago when she happened to turn black, and now she wants to be known as black. So I don't know, is she Indian or is she black?
She is always identified as a black woman.
I respect either one. I respect either one, but she obviously doesn't, because she was Indian all the way, and then all of a sudden she made a turn and she became a black person.
Just to be clear, sir, do you believe that
I think somebody should look into that too when you continue in a very hostile, nasty tone.
For those of you who don't know, Kamala Harris has long identified as black. Just to be clear, Kamala Harris has long identified as both African American and South Asian. After all, she was born in California to an Indian-born mother and a Jamaican father. She's also the first black and Asian American vice president in US history. And since launching her campaign for the White House earlier this month, Harris has faced a barrage of sexist and racial attacks from the right wing in America online. Trump's remarks were quickly condemned by the White House and activists across social media platforms. Moreover, the annual gathering of black journalists in Chicago witnessed quite a chaotic panel, as Trump even went on to accuse the moderator of being rude and presenting nasty questions. Trump's appearance also received a lot of backlash as he evaded several questions. On multiple occasions, audience members at the annual convention in Chicago attempted to fact-check Trump. For instance, Trump received a mix of jeers, laughter, and interruptions from attendees when he claimed that Harris did not pass her bar exam to be a lawyer. But the one remark that garnered the most taunts was when Trump said that he has been the best president for African Americans since Abraham Lincoln. Now, while all of this continues, there's one factor that we absolutely have to talk about when it comes to what a candidate needs to win the White House. That is money. Election campaigns in the United States are among the most expensive in the world. For example, during the 2020 election cycle, candidates and parties spent a massive $14 billion in campaigning. That was the most expensive election cycle in US history. So why do you need this much money? Well, first of all, America probably has the longest election cycles in the democratic world. For presidential elections, candidates can announce their campaigns well over 1.5 years before election day. So, for example, Barack Obama announced that he would seek the presidency in February 2007. He was elected in November 2008 and became president in January 2009, a full 2 years after first launching his campaign. Running a national election machine for that amount of time takes massive amounts of money. It also doesn't help that America is a massive country with a population of over 300 million people. Reaching all of those people across 50 different states and several time zones requires a solid bank balance. Campaigns have also become a lot more expensive to fund because of advertising. Ever since digital and social media acquired billions of users, parties have spent vast amounts of money to push their messages on those platforms. So given how important money is, financial donors have a major amount of power over the American election process. And a lack of funding can often kill a campaign. Part of the reason why Joe Biden dropped out of the race was that major Democratic Party donors made clear that they simply would not back him to beat Donald Trump. So with all of that said, how are Kamala Harris and Donald Trump doing when it comes to fundraising? Let's start with Donald Trump. Between April to June 2024, Trump's Republican Party raised $331 million by some estimates to fund his re-election campaign. He's got the backing of billionaires like Elon Musk, Silicon Valley investor Peter Thiel, and hedge fund billionaires Bill Ackman and Steven Schwarzman. Until Biden was in the race, Trump was far ahead on fundraising figures. Biden's campaign raised about $60 million less than Trump's campaign in the last quarter of fundraising. But despite these advantages, it's important to note that Trump and his Republican Party have seen reduced support among a lot of big money donors. Take a look at this image. While nearly half of Fortune 100 company CEOs used to donate money to the Republican Party in 2004, almost none do in 2024. Economists actually point out that Trump's real economic and fundraising power comes from influential local elites. These individuals aren't the multi-billionaires that dominate news headlines. Instead, they're local business owners who have enormous influence over life and politics in specific regions in America. Now, let's take a look at Kamala Harris. As we mentioned before, she's had a blistering start to her fundraising campaign, since she's raised around $200 million in just 1 week. For context, Harris has raised more money in a week than Biden and Trump raised combined in the whole month of June. Her arrival shows the Democratic Party's donor base, as well as a vast swathe of other donors, are energized by Harris's candidacy. Her campaign says that 66% of the donations that came in the first week came from first-time donors. She's also been backed by a number of big names: Indian-American venture capitalist Vinod Khosla, Netflix founder Reed Hastings, LinkedIn founder Reid Hoffman, and former Facebook number 2 Sheryl Sandberg. This strong start, along with improved polling numbers, adds to Harris's chances of challenging Trump for the presidency in November. As we move forward in the election, we now have my colleague Neha Shukla, who explains to us who the major players are in the elections.
We're diving into the DNC and RNC, the big players in the upcoming 2024 US presidential race. So what are the DNC and RNC anyway? Think of them as the ultimate game masters of US politics. They're not just about throwing fancy conventions, they're the heart and soul of their parties. They shape party platforms, support candidates, and organize those massive national conventions where the party's presidential pick is officially crowned. Before we go any further, here's a quick history trip. In 1831, the first major national political convention kicked off with the National Republicans. Cut to today, these very conventions have morphed into high-energy events where parties rally their base and launch their presidential campaigns. Coming to the 2024 convention showdown. As for the Republicans, the RNC has already wrapped up its convention in Milwaukee, and well, Donald Trump is officially the Republican nominee. As for the Democrats, the spotlight's on Chicago for the DNC. But there's a twist. President Joe Biden decided not to run again and has given his thumbs up to Vice President Kamala Harris. Now this changes everything. With Kamala now leading the Democratic charge backed by Joe Biden's endorsement, the stage is set for a historic election this year. Here's the scoop. Out of nearly 4,700 delegates, over 3,800 have already pledged to back Biden. With his endorsement, it's highly likely that those delegates will swing behind Harris. Vice President Kamala Harris is on the rise, with her favorability rating jumping to 43% in the latest poll, up from 35% last week. Independent voters are particularly showing strong support for Harris, backing her 44% to 40%. Just a week ago, they were leaning the other way with a 28 to 47%. Meanwhile, Donald Trump seems to be facing a dip in his approval rating, now down to 36% favorable compared to 53%. That's a significant drop from last week's favorable rating. Now, let's talk about Harris' next big move. choosing a running mate. The question being, who will Harris pick as her vice president? Names like California Governor Gavin Newsom and Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer have already been tossed around so far, among others. Each has a different level of support among voters, with Newsom and Kelly currently leading the pack in favorability. Harris is expected to make her decision in the coming weeks, just ahead of the Democrats' virtual roll call to officially nominate her for presidency. So the Democratic convention is shaping up to be a pretty crucial moment. If Harris clinches the nomination, it will set the stage for a showdown with Trump in November. With Biden's backing, Harris does seem to have a pretty solid shot, but she will need to lock down every delegate's vote to make it official. So, with the RNC and DNC pulling out all the stops, the 2024 election is shaping up to be a pretty thrilling ride. Keep your eyes open because this political season is about to get wild.
Now it's time to get you some of the big updates that you might have missed from the American election. New reports suggest that President Joe Biden is expected to give a primetime address on the first night of the Democratic National Convention this month in Chicago. Reports even suggest that President Biden might be getting a big tribute from his Democratic colleagues that night. Convention organizers have a lot to do in a 4-day convention. This includes presidential and vice presidential nomination acceptance addresses, speeches by former Presidents Bill Clinton and Barack Obama, as well as possible appearances by other major party figures. Moving on, ahead of the presidential election, the advertisement war between the Democrats and the Republicans is heating up. According to new figures, the Republican Party is spending $12 million on ads in Pennsylvania, Georgia, Michigan, Arizona, Nevada, and Wisconsin, all of which are crucial states in the upcoming election. These ads hit out at Harris for failing to visit the southern border during her time in the White House. Remember, that is where a major immigration crisis is currently taking place. Meanwhile, the Harris campaign is spending $50 million on advertisements ahead of the Democratic National Convention. New reports also suggest that Vice President Kamala Harris will hold her first rally with her new vice presidential pick on August 6th in Philadelphia. The high-stakes decision on who will run with Harris has taken center stage since Harris became the Democratic frontrunner. After the Philadelphia rally, both Harris and her running mate will start campaigning in 7 swing states for the next 4 days. The United Auto Workers Union, in a recent development, has also endorsed Kamala Harris for US President. This move gives a boost to the Vice President in the swing state of Michigan as her political campaign ramps up. The 370,000 member body has previously endorsed Democratic candidate Joe Biden as well. While the union has traditionally endorsed Democrats, it forged an even deeper relationship with Biden when he became the first sitting president to visit a picket line in Detroit last year during a protest. And Harris's campaign continues to grow stronger as more than 100 venture capitalists have pledged to vote for her in the presidential elections. This comes as a strong show of support amid concerns that Trump is making inroads in Silicon Valley. Trump's Silicon Valley base argues that the Republican Party and Trump himself are generally more favorable to the startup ecosystem. Thank you so much for joining us on this first episode of Race for the White House. We'll be coming to you 5 times a week with the latest developments in American politics and the US presidential elections. Thank you for watching.